So, you want to go overseas? Kill some Nazis.
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
Captain America: The First Avenger was the fifth film in the MCU, and there were some challenges that this movie had to overcome. Not only did you have a film in the 1990s that didn't get the best word of mouth, but you also had Chris Evans that was coming hot off the heels of Fantastic Four, so he had to win a majority of the comic book fans that were the biggest fan of Fantastic Four. Plus, on top of that, this was the last film in the MCU before we had the Avengers, so this movie had to work overall as a product. Otherwise, our expectations for the Avengers weren't going to be as high as they were going into the movie. And by the power vested in Feige, he was able to make this movie work. What makes the first Avenger really stand out amongst most of the films, not only in just phase 1, but the MCU overall, is that this movie is more of a character-driven story, leaving most of the action being shown in montages instead of being the forefront. At the core of the story is you have a kid from Brooklyn just wanting to do his part in being part of a war to save lives, but everybody just looks down on him for the size of his body. From the doctors to the girls that Bucky tries to set him up with for their double dates, everybody just takes one look at him and just writes him off. That is until Dr. Abraham Erskine decides to just give him a chance to not only just prove to himself, but to everybody that it's not the physical strength, but the heart of a warrior.
Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing. That you will stay who you are. Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
Chris Evans, I think, is the perfect casting. I know a lot of people were really trepidatious about his casting because you have a lot of people that were not the biggest fan of the two Fantastic Four movies, but that was my introduction to Chris Evans. Plus, I already knew that he had the physicality to be Captain America. So my expectations for Chris Evans being Captain America were really high. I did have a feeling that he would be able to pull this role off, and I think Chris Evans embodies Captain America not just in its physical strength, but also in his mentality of how he sees the world and how he wants the world to see him. After the procedure, Steve Rogers doesn't have the same body, but he has the same mentality, and that's what really pushes him forward. The relationship that they build between Abraham Erskine and Steve Rogers is probably one of my favorite mentorships because you have these two walks of life and they just believe in each other. That is where the strength of this movie is, so that when Abraham Erskine's death happens, it has a little bit more of an emotional toll on not only just on the characters, but also the audience that really buys into the relationship between these two, and they really made it work. The film is directed by Joe Johnson, and he was able to just pull a lot of fantastic moments that I did not really appreciate the first time that I saw this movie. The fact that we are close to 15 years after this movie is released is just insane to me. I just can't believe that it's about to be 15 years next year. Still holds up as one of the most underrated films in the MCU, but also one of the most underrated comic book films of all time. There are just such wonderful depths that this movie takes, and just the toll that it takes on these characters. The relationship not just between Abraham Erskine and Steve, but also the relationship between Peggy and Steve. The fact that they were able to construct that wonderful relationship is something that I really enjoyed about this movie. There were just some fantastic moments in here that I did not really appreciate the first time around. Rewatching it again, I can see the commitment and the heart that they really infused in this movie, and a lot of that has to do with the direction of Joe Johnson. He was just able to construct such beautiful and wonderful character moments that it really does make it stand out amongst every single film in the MCU. A lot of the MCU movies nowadays is just focus more on the action instead of the character development. That is what really makes this movie really stand out to me. It's the fact that they took time to get you invested in these characters, and they didn't need to focus on the action being the forefront of this movie. They let the characters breathe. They let the characters grow at a steady pace. That is something that we don't really see a lot in the MCU nowadays. And I just really appreciate that this movie had the time and the commitment to make you care about these characters, watch them grow. But on the other hand, you also had Hugo Weaving as the Red Skull, the villain of the film, and he's not really something to write home about. This movie is just really centered more on Steve Rogers and his journey. There are some moments between the Red Skull and Steve Rogers that I really enjoyed, but it's not something that I'm going to be remembering long after the movie is over. The movie really takes its time with its characters and makes them grow, and that is what makes this movie really the most underrated film in the MCU, and really what makes this movie stand out amongst the bunch. It's more about the characters growing at a slow and steady pace, but also the story around these characters is what makes this movie really intriguing. The fact that you had a kid that nobody really gave a second thought of, somebody that nobody really gave him a chance and knew that he was going to be set up for failure, he proved everybody wrong, that it's not about the size of your body, but it's the strength of your heart. And a lot of that has to do with the relationship between Steve Rogers and Abraham Erskine. So overall, I'm going to go ahead and give Captain America the First Avenger the butter drizzled popcorn. That's right, it's tasty in all the right ways, it's sweet, delectable, and it's definitely worth a rewatch. If you have not checked this movie out in quite a while, give it a second watch. I think you're going to appreciate it more a second time. I really enjoyed revisiting this movie because there were so many moments in here that I appreciate nowadays than I did when this movie first came out. There are more moments here that I really cherish and I respect. The fact that this movie is more of a slow burn type of movie and it doesn't really focus on a lot of the action. It's just the characters that you really care about. It's the growth of these characters and just seeing their journey is what makes this movie really stand out. But those are my thoughts on Captain America the First Avengers. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought about this movie. Is it an underrated movie for you, or is this a movie that just you don't give a second thought to? Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys for the next video.